Between chalkboards, ink-stained fingers and wooden desks, something unforgettable happened in British classrooms. The 1960s and 70s weren't just decades, they were growing pains, revolution and resilience. School was strict, but the world outside was changing fast. From music to protests, television to technology, a generation was being shaped, inside uniforms and under headmasters' stares. There were no mobile phones, no internet, and detention still meant writing lines on a blackboard. But somehow, those corridors, lunch breaks and assembly halls left deeper marks than just report cards. If you walked those halls in black lace-up shoes, with your tie slightly crooked and your ears full of the Rolling Stones or Pink Floyd, what comes next might feel like home. The smell of freshly cut pine, sawdust on your shoes, and the loud buzz of a bandsaw. Woodwork lessons were a rite of passage. Boys, because it was mostly boys, lined up at benches under the sharp eye of a gruff instructor, usually a veteran with more patience for hammers than for excuses. These lessons weren't just about sanding and measuring, they were about learning discipline, precision, and staying out of trouble. For many, the first time holding a chisel came with a warning: cut away from your body, not into it. Mistakes weren't just corrected, they were displayed as lessons for the rest. Projects ranged from birdhouses to letter racks, and if you managed to bring yours home intact, your parents kept it for years, no matter how crooked it was. Pride came not from perfection, but from persistence. Tools were kept in perfect order, and woe to the one who misplaced a tenon saw. Every drawer had its place, and the classroom felt more like a workshop than a schoolroom. The lessons taught more than woodcraft. They taught self-reliance. No screens, no shortcuts, just the sound of sandpaper and the constant hum of effort. Safety goggles were optional, but consequences were not. It was in these quiet, sawdust-filled spaces that friendships were forged, knuckles were bruised, and skills took shape. You didn't just make a pencil holder, you made a memory. Hard as a brick, sweet as a dream, chocolate concrete cake was the king of British school desserts. Served warm with a splash of bright pink custard, it wasn't elegant, but it was unforgettable. If you saw it on the tray, you rushed to the front of the dinner line. It crunched when it shouldn't have, yet somehow melted in your mouth. Lunchtimes in the 1960s and 70s were an entire world of their own. Tables packed with loud chatter, mashed potatoes scooped like cannonballs, and a dinner lady with a stare that could stop time. Then came dessert, and if it was chocolate concrete, it felt like winning the lottery. The contrast of hot custard against the cold, hard slice became the stuff of legend. No one really knew what was in it, but everyone wanted the recipe. Families tried to recreate it at home, but something about that school kitchen made it taste different. The pink custard. Possibly more artificial than natural, but nobody cared. It turned an ordinary lunch into something to look forward to. Some students would even trade parts of their main meal for it. This wasn't just about sugar. It was about reward, routine, and joy in small things. It reminded you that even in strict times, comfort could be found at the bottom of a plastic tray. Silence in the corridor wasn't always about respect, it was often about fear. The cane was real, visible, and wielded with authority. A slim stick of rattan, kept behind the head teacher's desk or hung in full view, it was the final warning for disobedience. It didn't happen every day, but the threat of it was enough to keep a room in line. One look from a teacher could freeze you in place. Talking back, being late, or forgetting homework could result in a trip to the office. And once there, you hoped for a lecture, not the sound of that dreaded swish. Some schools recorded it in the punishment book, others didn't. Boys were more commonly targeted, but girls weren't always spared. The sting stayed longer than the pain. It marked you. Parents didn't question it. In fact, some supported it. The idea of spare the rod, spoil the child, still held weight. Corporal punishment was part of the system, accepted as necessary discipline. Some teachers used it sparingly, others with pride. And while many feared it, others remember it with a strange kind of clarity, something that defined the times, not just the moment. It's easy to forget how normal it all seemed, but for those who were there, the sound of that cane cutting through air is something you never unhear. Did discipline really need to hurt so much? You didn't leave the house without it. Whether it was a flat cap, beret, or stiff-brimmed school hat, headgear was part of your uniform and your identity. Some hated it, others wore it with pride, but everyone knew the rules: no hat, no entry. For many schools, especially in the 60s, discipline extended to every visible detail, and that included what was on your head. Caps had to be worn properly, not backwards or tucked into a coat pocket. Lose it, and you'd face more than just embarrassment. You'd get a scolding or worse. Hats were labelled, often shared between siblings, and sometimes passed down year after year. Rain or shine, you wore them walking to school, standing at the gate, even on the bus. There was a strange pride in having a neat, polished cap, especially during morning inspections. Some students even brushed theirs at night, hoping for a nod from the headmaster the next day. It wasn't just fabric, it was tradition, status, and a little bit of pressure all rolled into one. Looking back, it seems excessive, even humorous. But at the time, that piece of headgear felt like it carried the weight of the whole school on your head. Before the first lesson, there was milk, delivered in crates, standing in lines, lukewarm or ice cold. Milk was part of every British schoolchild's morning. Government funded and presented as a health necessity, these third-of-a-pint bottles were both a blessing and a burden. Some kids drank theirs eagerly, others gagged, especially when the sun had warmed the crate too long. Paper straws pierced the silver foil cap, often with a splatter. And once the bottle was open, you had to finish it, or face teasing from your mates, or worse, a disappointed teacher. The smell alone was enough to make some students invent ways to disappear during milk time. Still, others collected the foil tops, folded them into chains, or saved them for art projects. Teachers supervised milk duty like a ritual. Pupils took turns distributing the bottles with responsibility and pride, even if they secretly hated the stuff. It wasn't about taste. It was about routine, community, and doing what everyone else did. Sometimes, in winter, the milk arrived with a thin sheet of ice on top. In summer, it curdled before your eyes. Decades later, people still remember the texture, the smell, the sound of crates clanking. It wasn't glamorous, but it's unforgettable. The bell rang, and like clockwork, the whole school gathered. Assembly wasn't optional, it was sacred. Shoes echoed against wooden floors as rows of pupils lined up, hands behind backs, eyes front. The piano would start, slightly out of tune but familiar, and the room filled with young voices singing all things bright and beautiful, or He Who Would Valiant Be. It wasn't just about hymns. There were announcements, reminders, sometimes warnings. The head teacher would speak with calm authority, often about behaviour, effort, or the importance of respecting others. Assemblies set the tone for the day, quiet, orderly, reverent. There was no applause, no chatting, just the creak of benches and the rustle of uniforms. Sometimes a guest speaker would appear, or a teacher would read a moral tale. Eyes would wander to the windows, the ceiling, the clock, but everyone stood still because that's what was expected. Even those who didn't care for hymns sang them by heart, because routine had a way of imprinting itself. It may sound rigid now, but it was grounding. A shared moment before the chaos of the day began. For many, the memory of those hymns never left. They still hum them under their breath decades later. Do school mornings still feel this sacred? Before projectors, tablets, or even dry erase boards, the blackboard ruled the classroom. Tall and often towering over the pupils, it was the teacher's main weapon, and for those sitting in the front row, a daily shower of chalk dust. Lessons were written line by line in white or yellow chalk, with a wooden board rubber in constant use, leaving grey clouds in the air. Some teachers had elegant handwriting. Others scribbled like mad scientists mid-thought. Mistakes were wiped away in a single stroke, but the dust lingered. By the end of the day, the board looked like a battlefield of equations, maps, and half-erased instructions. Students who were lucky, or unlucky, were chosen to clean it, puffing clouds into the air with each swipe. You could always spot the kids who sat up front. Chalky sleeves, white smudges on their blazers, and sometimes a sneeze or two. Even the smell of chalk became part of the classroom's identity. During tests, the blackboard would stay blank and intimidating, as if holding its breath along with the students. It was more than a tool. It was a symbol of order, authority, and learning. Today, it's gone, but in memory, it looms just as large. There was an art and a mess to it. Before Biros became standard, ink pens were the norm, and inkwells were built into every desk. The process was slow but meaningful. You dipped, you wrote, you blotted. Mistakes weren't erased, they were scratched out, sometimes with frustration, sometimes with style. Ink-stained fingers were a familiar sight. It wasn't unusual to see someone's sleeve or school jumper marked forever by a leaky pen. Homework pages were handled like precious objects, carefully kept clean or completely ruined by a careless drop. For some, it was a lesson in patience. For others, a source of constant anxiety. Fountain pens gave writing a weight that ballpoints never could. Your handwriting mattered, and so did the pressure of your stroke. Everyone had their own rhythm, and teachers often judged neatness as much as content. The smell of fresh ink, the soft scratch against the paper, it was all part of the ritual. It made writing feel important. Like what you put on the page actually meant something. Even now, the memory of those blue fingers still makes people smile or cringe. It didn't just belong in stadiums or royal ceremonies. In schools, singing God Save the Queen was a tradition, a closing act to assemblies and events. Everyone stood. Most sang. A few just mimed the words, but the sense of unity it brought, however temporary, was powerful. The anthem echoed through halls with tall windows and polished floors. Some sang loudly, others softly, but all were expected to show respect. For a generation raised on duty, order, and pride, it was more than music. It was identity. Heads held high, hands behind backs, voices lifted for a monarch most had never seen in person. Even the more rebellious students rarely challenged the moment. It was too ingrained, too ritualistic to break. In a way, it marked the end of the week. A pause before rushing out the doors toward freedom. It might have been routine, but it felt meaningful. Now, those lyrics may be less frequently sung in classrooms, but the echo of those final notes and the pride that once came with them still lives on. It was more than a song, it was a symbol. School wasn't just a place, it was a world of its own. Between hymns and homework, chalkboards and cold milk, we lived something bigger than routine. We were shaped by things we didn't choose, the anthem, the cane, the uniforms, and yet they became part of who we are. Maybe we didn't realize it at the time, but those small, strange, beautiful details, they stayed with us. They became the background music of our memories, the smell of ink, the click of the inkwell lid, the sound of morning assembly. All of it still alive in the corners of our mind. If this video brought a memory back, big or small, don't let it fade again. Keep it alive and keep sharing it. Subscribe for more stories that take you back, one vivid moment at a time.